I'm Sean O'Neill and welcome to my weekly podcast where I chat to the key figures who shape and lead their industries. Today my guest is Lee McAteer.
The entrepreneurial journey is anything other than steady. The highs are high, the lows are low, but my word, it's going to be one hell of a ride one way or the other with stories to tell.
And I remember thinking, if that's all that's cut out for me, a maths teacher or a banker, I'm fucked. This brought back all the memories of a childhood, and there's very few things apart from going into a pick and mix or into a sweet shop or a wrestling that actually makes you think of the really early days. So when was the first time you thought, wow, this could be something for me?
In terms of the wrestling space? Yeah. Well, I was always a huge fan of it as a kid. And growing up, I was very much a Bret the Hitman Hart fan. I remember my parents taking me to what was the GMX Centre in Manchester. It was Ric Flair versus Bret Hart for the World Championship. And I was hooked and I thought, wow, this is absolutely fantastic. But as you kind of, at least in my circumstances, as you get older, you sometimes don't get involved with certain things. And then, in truth, I had a few different business ideas that I was looking at, but we were then coming back from a night out in Liverpool, and then all of a sudden, Friday Night SmackDown would be on really late, and a load of us coming back, half cut, were literally watching it, and I was like, wow, this is actually really... But what really intrigued me was how it was marketed, and all the things they were doing in and around it, and you could see all the subliminal bits as I started to get more experience of everything from the ticketing to the merchandise to just the marketing and the whole entire juggernaut. And that was something that really kind of fascinated me, which I then kind of put into a lot of the brands and the different things that I was working on. Even kind of going back to when I became production editor of Max Power magazine, I was still thinking of all of these different connotational values of what WWE was really. So that was the kind of starting point. And then there's a lot of stuff in between, but then many years later, I had an Avatar and Atoll bonded travel company, which then became Invasion Camp Group. And I had an opportunity to get into the wrestling space. For WrestleMania 30, my girlfriend at the time got me tickets for WrestleMania 30, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is going to be so good, Sean. But
a great girlfriend that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one I buggered up on there, let me say. But what I didn't understand was how difficult it was to actually sort out everything else around that particular event. So I thought, there must be a travel company that does this, that I can just literally just take the pain out. And it turned out there wasn't. So it gave me the idea, and then a few years later, we then created wrestling travel with a lot of help from one of my best mates, a guy called Ross Alcock, and the rest is history, really. And that was the kind of starting point into the wrestling world.
So, do you actually, when you thought I'll set up a travel agency about wrestling, did you get the people that understood about travel more so than the people that understood about wrestling? Or how did you tap into the fan group and the knowledge to be able to get these people? Because usually I find somebody that is an expert in one field, and I try and add the missing bits to it.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, we kind of internally had what I felt was the skill sets anyway to do so, because I had everybody that had the experience on the Avatar and the Atoll travel side, and then we needed experience or people that were able to tap in to that wrestling community. Yeah. And I wouldn't say I was a major part of the community by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew people that were.
The passion there.
Yeah, and for me, I've always found, Sean, that the best business ideas are the ones where you've actually encountered an issue yourself because you've identified that problem. In my world, I call it IDA, identify, describe, analyse, and then execute what that idea is. And for me, there's nothing better if that particular point actually comes from your own experience, and that was exactly what happened with that particular one. Then we then tapped into the variety of wrestling communities. In fact, one of the first communities I tapped into was actually a local promotion here in Liverpool called TNT Extreme Wrestling. We then helped sort all their ticketing out, and we did a bit of sponsorship back and forth, and then that gave us the opportunity to advertise all of our deals into their distribution channels, and that was, the rest is history really, and that was the start of what became wrestling travel, albeit I ended up selling wrestling travel a few years later, and then obviously also now own Progress Wrestling and Defy.
So if there was a skill set that you think is the one that helps all the rest of your skills, become apparent, is it like the marketing side? Is it the ability to connect? Is it the ability to see? What is the bit that you think? Because I think you obviously have a skill for understand marketing as well and how to connect people.
Well, it's also about being ahead of the curve, really. So many years ago, I was working at a summer camp in Massachusetts, and all the people I was working with were, a lot of which were from Harvard. And that was in 2003. And of course, in 2003, that was when, and I quote, the Facebook was being bandied about. Yeah. And okay, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time when all of us Brits were on MySpace. And the only way I could keep in contact with people, or certain people that I became friends with, was to actually log into Harvard
MySpace.
servers. Yeah, big up MySpace. Big up Tom if you're watching. But again, it's about trying to be on top of the curves, and I've always tried to do that with all of the businesses or brands or associations or clubs that I've been a part of, because if you're ahead of the game on that, then all of a sudden you're so much further down the field, to the point that even if you haven't got, dare I say it, the budgets to compete, if you're ahead of the game, then all of a sudden you've taken so much more traction compared to what you would have done, and I've been very successful in doing that. So like AmeriCamp was the first organisation of its type to get the blue tick on Twitter. Just silly things like that really kind of meant something in terms of that social media space. So,
but isn't there so many businesses that are so far ahead of the game they've actually gone too early?
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely, no doubt.
You manage to know that you're slightly ahead of the game, but not too far ahead to actually people get you, or you're able to connect with the audience. There's already an audience there that you're able to connect with.
I mean, again, I can't say that I've got a specific way of saying, okay, I know that this has almost kind of been beta tested to the point that it'll work. But what I would say is that any time I've done something, whether it's, for example, try to properly implement, say, Instagram into Tranmere Rovers Football Club or TikTok or anything like that, there's always been a good argument for the fact that it's already started to get the ball rolling, where you can see that all of a sudden there are going to be some material benefits.
There's an audience there.
Yeah. Because there's so many different social media profiles, different organisations that are set up all the time. If you will literally chase your tail on every single one of them, the reality is that you'd be wasting your time. And and to quote the chairman of Tranmere Rovers Football Club, Mr. Palios, it's you don't want to spend just enough time to waste it. So it's about trying to really kind of get into what is the best use of your time, working smarter, not working harder, and pick your battles.
So Progress Wrestling, it's an independent. How does it manage to play with the big boys like the WWE? How does it manage to be valued within? Because sometimes you work with big organisations and they just, maybe their ego's too big, or they think they're the ones that pull the shots. How do you manage for them to get to understand your value?
A great question. I mean, I have to say, up until about a year or so ago, WWE were actually our business partners. So what would happen is that all of our content would actually go onto the WWE network in the UK. It would go onto Peacock Television, and any other distribution that they had, it would go onto their channels. And then we got given a heads up that they were selling, we thought. And then one thing led to another. Our contract was up anyway. We wanted to do a number of different things, especially in terms of going live with Progress. But we still have a great relationship with WWE, because a lot of their main stars, they literally made it via Progress. I mean, amongst other things, of course, as well. But for example, like the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time, Gunter, otherwise known as Walter with us, is our former Progress World Champion, our former Atlas Champion. And you've got a lot of Progress alumni, so it's almost like they know that there's a good. I mean, it's not always the case, but if you take it almost like as a football analogy, if you're going up the ranks, then all of a sudden, yes, unfortunately, you're going to get your best talent picked up by other organisations on a more global basis. But actually, that kind of shows you that we've done our job properly, because we've built somebody to be a true star.
So how I can imagine it is, you work with these superstars in the making. You choreograph, you work through how they're going to perform, where they're going to go. You create this superstar, and then you've got a ceiling of where maybe they feel they can go financially or in their career. And is it like looking after a baby till it's ready to leave the nest?
It is. It's a very, very strange thought process, Sean. I've got to be honest with you, but
because I wouldn't want to let them go.
Absolutely, neither do I. Especially when you're putting so much work into somebody, and then all of a sudden the fruits of your labour are kind of succeeding. That's where it does become difficult. But dare I say it, that means that we've done our job properly.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do, especially with the recent merger with Defy, and now we've got a major global operation in terms of the world of independent wrestling, is that actually we are getting to become a level of above. And the higher that we can go, the more opportunities that we have, then hopefully it means that actually talent will stick by us more.
Yeah.
But of course, the money that's being banded around at the moment between with WWE and AEW is absolutely crazy. I mean, the new $5 billion deal for WWE and Netflix. I mean, we're talking a huge amounts of money here. So, we're not going to kid ourselves and pretend that we're going to get to become WWE. It's just not going to happen. We're not even going to get anywhere near it.
In the football world, you can become an agent of these people and manage and constantly have some sort of connection as they go on and be successful. Does it just stop in Progress Wrestling? Does it stop with the person that you've helped transform? Or
it's a very good question. I mean, the answer to a certain extent is it doesn't just stop, because hopefully you've built such a good relationship up with those previous talent that they will always see Progress Wrestling in a good light. And I appreciate that's not always going to be the case, but hopefully that means that when they're trying to see up and coming talent, that they will then either, whether it's behind the scenes or whatnot, actually help give advice to help bring the next generation of talent through. And sometimes, we do get some, really nice nods to Progress. So last time when WWE were in the UK last year for their Money in the Bank event, they actually referred to Progress Wrestling on commentary. So it's little things like that that's really, really cool. The current AEW Women's Champion, Toni Storm, she's a former Progress Women's World Champion with us. So there's lots of connotations in terms of what we've done and marks on the industry. I suppose from a football perspective, it's probably no different to, say, a footballer that did really well, let's say, at, say, a lower league, Premier League team that then goes to, say, Liverpool or Manchester City and succeeds so much more. But our job is to actually try and grow the business, and if we grow the talent and the fact that people want to buy tickets to see him or her, then we've done our job properly.
Do you help with like training regimes and diet, and do you like manage these people daily to make sure that they have the best, or do they have their own trainers? And
yeah, I mean, ultimately, Sean, they're independent contractors, albeit technically speaking, they're also independent contractors with WWE. But where that does become a bit more complicated is the fact that all of our talent can work on any promotion they want, technically speaking. Obviously, that depends on whether or not another promoter wants to use them. But the vast majority of all the talent will go to different training schools, and then from that, they will learn to get better, and then they'll work on other promotions, and then almost a bit like a football scouting type system, a number of us will actually go to these other promotions to see how those talents are getting on, whether they're current stars, whether they're stars that we haven't used yet, to see what the reaction is and everything else in between, and then look at potentially booking them for Progress or Defy in the future.
And is the background of these athletes, do they come from a specific sort of background? Are they gymnastics or weightlifting?
It's a brilliant question, because no path is exactly the same. So, for example, you've got Adam Maxted, who's just been on Love Island. Adam Maxted's been on Progress a number of times, arguably probably the best drop kick in the business. And then you've got people from all walks of life that end up coming into a space. Where it does become a bit more complicated is that, and actually this is something we are trying to change, is there isn't, say, for example, one clear path to become, this is how I become a Progress wrestler. Whereas, say, for example, in football, you know that you're going to potentially get scouted by a club. You might be at Tranmere from a young age, and then all of a sudden you might then end up going to Liverpool or wherever. So you can see that where the pyramid is up and down the scale. Whereas at Progress, and for that matter, wrestling in general, there isn't really that same kind of route where you say, okay, this is the path that will then end up getting you to the place that you want to be with us. And that's something that we are trying to change, to be able to give people more of an idea and a legitimate path to say, okay, I know that if I do A, B, C, and D, then I'm going to have the opportunities to do all these other aspects of what we're doing. And the big thing that we've done recently is that we've just sorted out American visas for 25 talent, which means that they can now legally go and work on American promotions, which hopefully will then get bigger eyeballs on them. So when they do come back to Progress from a UK perspective, more and more people will want to see them. There'll be more global eyeballs, and therefore more people will subscribe to our version of Netflix, which is basically Demand Progress Plus, and then hopefully it then gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
How do you remember what name? She must have so many Instagram accounts, email addresses,
Oh my gosh.
contact, phone numbers. Have you got a day of the week for every business?
Well, this is it, Sean. Honestly, I mean, I can honestly say that.
I can ask myself the same question at times.
Well, the thing is being an entrepreneur, it's let's be frank about it. It's about learning from the mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. I think the big key for that is to make sure that you learn from those mistakes to be able to actually ensure that you don't do the same thing again. But every day is a school day, always learning every single day. And for me, I've always tried to be a sponge, no matter what sector I'm in or what I'm working on or anything in between, really.
So when you were in school, were you an entrepreneur in those days? Because this is the thing that I guess the kids out there want to know. How much money do you make? When do you start making it? And that's what it is. But were you, as a teenager, always thinking of these ideas as a kid?
Do you know what, Sean? I ended up having a bit of an entrepreneurial education without knowing it. So my mum actually created one of the UK's first balloon businesses of all things, literally helium balloons, after watching, I think she was watching Dallas, the soap opera. And in one of the scenes, I think they gave him a balloon or something or other. And my uncle, my mum's brother, who lived in Philadelphia, she literally inquired and said, Roy, is there any way we can get these? And then he managed to find out how to get them, brought them over. So literally on a weekend, I'd be there helping my mum and dad make all these balloons and balloon in the boxes. I can't lie, that was a lot of fun as well. Not that I'm trying to say everyone should be taking helium, but it was fun. But literally, it was almost kind of an entrepreneurial journey, an education without even knowing about it and seeing how hard my parents worked on that. But ultimately, I didn't really understand and I think back then, I don't think people really quite understood the whole entrepreneurialism and everything else that goes in between it. I'd say it's a lot more prevalent now with Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, and but also as well.
It was needed back then.
I think it was.
You had to feed the family. You had to pay the bills.
Absolutely.
So if you sat at home and didn't think of something, well, you just would have had to skip meals.
Totally. But it's what I mean. What's funny is bear in mind with that kind of entrepreneur education that I didn't even know I was getting, I ended up becoming president of Leeds University Law Society. And then I ended up treating it like a business, but I didn't even know I was doing it. All I was trying to do.
So you were good at school then?
I was okay. Yeah, I mean, I did okay.
Oh, you enjoyed school?
I wouldn't say I enjoyed school, no, personally. I struggled at school to the point that I felt as though it was a bit limiting. I went to an all-boys school, got a great relationship with that particular school now, but I always feel as though I'm not necessarily for having schools where you're not with the opposite sex, because I just don't think it really sets you up for what real life is like in terms of being able to interact with people and one another. And I suppose kind of like then moving forward, I ended up leaving that particular school, ended up going to Yale Sixth Form College in Wrexham. Boo Wrexham, we don't like Wrexham, football team. And that then kind of really kicked off everything to the point of actually this is possible, that's possible. And I was very fortunate to have work experience with a wonderful guy called Ken Ward, who was the head cameraman for BBC in the north of England. And it just completely blew my mind to what was out there. And
so you discovered work on girls at the age of 17?
Basically, yeah, exactly that.
And
my mind was completely blown, Sean. Yeah, literally, absolutely.
No, yeah. I haven't got fond experience of school, but I left very young, but I then probably made things even more difficult for me because I hadn't really got the protection. I went into the big bad world very young, thinking that school definitely wasn't for me, and it wasn't for me. And if I was to do it again, it wouldn't be for me. I just was completely unprepared for how difficult it is to try and learn the lessons of life for the entrepreneurial world, because that was a whole new shock to the system.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because now the word entrepreneur seems to be fashionable, whereas I've always hated the word entrepreneur, because I always feel as though for others to refer to you as an entrepreneur rather than yourself, because I do feel as though the ones that, and maybe it's just because of the fashionable status of some of these TV programs.
Well, everyone's got a label now. Some labels are better than others, but you have to, if you can't describe yourself within a few words, then you sound dodgy.
Yeah.
So I've been sounding dodgy all my life, because they say to me, "What do you do?" And I go, and they think, oh, fuck it, I'm not going to ask him. Well, he's up to something. But it's the fact is I don't really know what I do, and everyone's an entrepreneur. So between them two, I'm still lost with my elevator pitch. No, I'm a podcaster. I'll just start saying I'm a podcaster. Do you want to come on my show? Yeah, but it is true. It's really interesting times because, so you can see how hungry your parents were.
Absolutely.
Which made you hungry.
Yeah.
I can see how hungry my parents and grandparents were, which made me hungry. But the last thing I ever thought was, am I going to be an entrepreneur? I didn't even know what that meant.
Yeah.
I still, it's quite vague, the definition of an entrepreneur, that I think it does encompass most people now, because people don't have jobs for life. Very few people
100%,
will spend their whole life with an identity.
But I don't know about you, Sean, in terms of growing up, but one of the things that I found was that all the parents always wanted their sons and daughters to be lawyers, accountants, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I trained to be a lawyer, so I'm kind of having a go at myself here. But in my opinion, what we should have been asking the generation to be is, we want you to be entrepreneurs. We actually want you to be making a difference rather than someone just dealing with somebody else's problems. And I think that's where, for me, that was almost became a bit of a moral obligation, to the point that I had to end up doing the things that I did. Because I remember when I was working in employment law, I can't mention who the client was, but very, very well-known food company. And we won a law case that, quite honestly, we shouldn't have won. And the girl who we'd basically won in the lawsuit against, I felt incredibly sorry for her. And there was no kind of thanks for doing your job or anything like that. And I thought, I'm just not sure I'm cut out to do all of this stuff. So then when I had all of these different entrepreneurial ideas, following on from what was then law and then Max Power magazine and everything else in between, it just kind of happened. But I only knew about how to do some of those things because I literally just wanted to, coming back to the Law Society stuff, I literally was trying to raise money to put on the best parties ever at the university. And I generated, I think it was something like £56,500 for a student law society, which was unheard of at the time. And I literally had to spend it. So I was spending it on the most ridiculous parties. And probably one of the reasons why Walkabout doesn't exist anymore, because I was giving them like 13,000 quid and saying to all of the students and the staff, literally, order whatever the hell you like. And then, if memory serves me right, I think my ugly mug was on the front of the Yorkshire Post for encouraging binge drinking.
Oh, I've done some research on you this past while, and you've got some interesting photographs everywhere.
Hate to think.
Well, although we've got similar stories, mine is simply driven out of fear of not wanting to be like everybody else in the community. Everyone was just complaining about having no money. Everyone was saying that I remember my poor nan was saying, oh, you should be a maths teacher or a banker, because I'm quite good at counting.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, if that's all that's cut out for me, a maths teacher or a banker, like, I'm fucked. Like, or a farmer, because I grew up on a farm. I thought something radically has to be done here, because when I saw my maths teacher, I definitely didn't want to end up like him. I saw the banker, and I thought I definitely don't want to end up like him. And the farmers, well, bless them, they had my granddad used to have to constantly mend the hole in his wellies with the same material that he would mend the hole of his bicycle wheel.
Wow.
And I just remember thinking, thankfully I was the very end of that. So through the stories and through what I saw, I didn't suffer like them. But so my entrepreneurial skills is completely driven out of fear that I have to figure a way of making more money, so I can't be surrounded by these people anymore, which ironically now is why I'm driven back to the farm out of respect because I've learned all the values and skills from those days, because that's how, although my parents were pushing me towards, a good education, they were being entrepreneurial to try and make money. Or my grandparents, they were farmers. So everyone was being entrepreneurial, but telling me that I had to get an education. Anyway, now I know, and it's nice to be able to smile about it. But yeah, the thing that you obviously have taken from your growing up and me is that you've used your people skills, your social skills, your emotional skills, because there's very few people that can be classed as Britain's best boss. and when I read that, I thought, that's definitely someone that knows how to connect.
Well,
so tell us about that one.
I mean, I can't lie to you, Sean. It was. I mean, the reality is, I'm not Britain's best boss, but it was incredibly kind of everybody in Fleet Street. It seemed was referring to it as, and it literally just happened organically.
Was that voted in Walkabout one night?
Probably. I think that's probably the only chance it would have been voted for that for sure. But no, it was incredibly humbling and.
So how did that come about?
Do you know what? I couldn't even tell you the exact way it all came about.
Or tell us the business that you were in at the time.
So at the time, I'd founded and created AmeriCamp, Camp Thailand, Invasion.com, amongst, you must have had about 15 particular brands at that time. And then one of the things that kind of kicked it all off was I decided that we were going to do an activation campaign where we were going to reward the staff in something that was a bit left field and a bit wacky. And I had an entrepreneurial incubator at the time where I would then help startups in a whole variety of different ways. I had a kid come in who needed a lot of guidance, to be honest with you. But his business was quite simple. It was ball pits, basically creating ball pits in different little areas and stuff like that. So one day I just turned around to him, and this was the beauty of what I had set up. So obviously I couldn't give all my time, but if I was making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, then if one of the startups was down there, they could speak to me for, like, say, 5-10 minutes or whatever it may be. And I just said to him, just as an off chance, just interested, how many plastic balls have you actually got? And I think he said something like 500,000 or something or other. And I said, just of interest, I said, do you reckon we could fill this office with all of them? And he laughed at me and went, you're joking, right? I went, no, I'm actually being quite serious. Do you think you could? Maybe, yeah. And then at the time I owned a marketing company, and I said to those guys, I said, right, if we set up all of these different time-lapse cameras of it being built and the takeaway and everything else in between. But what I decided to do was I didn't tell my staff that this was happening. So literally,
it was a weekend. 24 hours later.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny, honestly, Sean. So literally, everyone then starts turning up, and they're like, and you see their reactions, and it was almost like being punked, I guess, or or Candid Camera, or one of those TV type shows. And it was just so funny. And literally the entire day, everybody worked out of the ball pit, literally answering the phones as normal, everything. It was so funny.
So you actually filled the whole office?
I filled the whole office. So
the balls were
literally
everywhere.
To the point where it was it was quite a big office, and then we filmed it all, and then different clips went out there, and then a number of different channels were then saying, is this the best boss ever? And then people were then trying to find information about me, and and some of the people were being interviewed about me and stuff like that, and had said nice things. And yeah, one thing led to another, and then it was in the Daily Mail, Britain's best boss. Said I was 2 years younger than I really was, so therefore you should always believe. Always believe what you read in the Daily Mail, obviously. But no, it was very, very humbling, and I don't think for 1 minute I am Britain's best boss, but it was incredibly kind and humbling at the time. And because you'll know this as well as I do, Sean, is that sometimes it's very, very difficult to work with staff, and when you're being put out there on such a pedestal, the minute you do something wrong in the eyes of an employee, all of a sudden, well, you're not Britain's best boss, you're the worst person ever. And I can think of a number of circumstances with relationships with people that unfortunately have dwindled over the years, purely because whether it's jealousy or sadly not being up to the job properly anymore, or a few things in between. And that does become difficult because you're there to be shot at, and you know this as well as I do, but if you've got a bit of a media personality, you're always going to be shot at, whether it's social media trolls or whatever. But that was a very, very fun time in my life. Oh, that's the reason I did as well, is I took a load of my staff to Las Vegas as well. So that was quite fun.
Hope none of my staff were listening to this. I'm going to sound like Britain's worst boss.
But it was a very cool time.
No, it's really difficult in business because there is the business that's your baby and it has to be looked after, but you've got all these people that you do want to look after. And
it's so difficult because when and again I can tell from just from meeting you properly now and stuff, is that when you're personable and you're so desperate for people to actually get the rewards and everything for all the hard work they're doing, it also becomes so difficult when you have to have difficult conversations with people. And that's where I do find it tough, because I'm always trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. But then you get to a point and say, look, enough's enough. But of course, they might not necessarily see it the same way as you do. And as a consequence, you're then the enemy, you're the bad guy, and everything else in between. And then you've got what I believe is, levels of immaturity where people go online and say, oh, this person is this, or this person is that.
Thankfully, I haven't witnessed much of that, or else I just don't check. I let my team go online and do most of that stuff. I try to stay. There's enough information in my head daily without trying to, to find out what other people may say. But the bit that sort of, I'm still trying to figure out who I am, because I always thought that I was this tough, resilient character that people wouldn't mess with, because they'd know that I'll tell them the way it is.
Yeah.
But in recent years, I feel, have I been had off here because I've lent money to this person, I'm always on the phone to this person, I'm even offering it, if you ever need anything, come to me. And I've realised that I've ended up being, and I love the fact that I can pick up my phone, but I've had to draw the line now. I've said, you can pick up the phone to me when you really need me, and I'll spend a certain amount of time helping you. But it has to stop.
100%, yeah. I
found that I've gone too far with some people where, without them even knowing, or maybe even knowing, I'm like a martyr. So I'm a business owner, having to look after families.
Yep.
And then the flip side of that is you get these incredible people. We've just talked about one of them before. A really good friend of ours just come in and they just lighten the whole place up, and you go, that's why I'm fucking doing it.
Yeah.
Because there's people out there that, then it's the opposite. You give them an opportunity, and then they're giving you double back, and you say, no, you need the opportunity, and then you're actually telling them, take the weekend off, will you? Stay at home with your families. So I am questioning myself at times. Am I actually am I in tune with things as much as I actually thought I was? Because there's definitely there's more question marks over my head now as me as a personality and a business owner. To the point is, I'm actually questioning, am I actually cut out to be a business owner?
Well, it's so funny you should say that, because I remember doing, I think it was an interview I did with the Times newspaper a few years ago, and I said to the journalist, I said, I am the most reluctant entrepreneur you'll ever meet, because it was never something that I envisaged that I would go down. I mean, but then you think to yourself, well, at least I did when I was growing up. I thought, by the age of 30, I'd be married with kids and have something that's pretty steady. Whereas, let's be frank about it, the entrepreneurial journey is anything other than steady. It's a complete not a roller coaster. The highs are high, the lows are low, but my word, it's going to be one hell of a ride, one way or the other, with stories to tell. But I always question, even now, I think to myself, am I doing the right thing here? Am I doing that? And, and a few years ago, I had an opportunity. I got headhunted for a pretty phenomenal job in Australia. And I was thinking to myself, do I take it? Do I not? And my old man, who is like my best friend, he's still in that mindset of, well, when you're going to get a proper job. He doesn't quite think like that, but it's almost kind of that, like...
My folks have stopped. Do
you know what I mean, though, Sean? It's just one of those things where it's almost kind of like, oh, well, why don't you go do this? And the opportunity I had over there, but I turned it down because I didn't feel as though the brands that I'd created at the time had really kind of got their major value that could come from it. But there's always those question marks, and I always think that's why I always find it funny when you go and speak to some of these so-called entrepreneurs that have made it. I'm not really necessarily interested in their success. I'm more interested in the failures that they've done and actually what they've learned. Because anybody can just turn around and go, oh yes, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, I've done that. But it's the honesty and the rawness that I find the most interesting.
I think me and you could have a big conversation to see who failed the most. Because I've had a few big fuck-ups along the way. Loads of small ones, but a few big ones.
They all add up.
But I just mentioned on my parents there, like my parents are the most supportive. It's actually probably incredible mix, because deep down they do extremely worry or concerned about me. I'm an only child as well, so I suppose that's even the icing on the cake. But the unquestionable support to the point is, my mum asks almost no questions and actually doesn't want to know. My dad asks questions because he is really concerned and would often come up with the question, could you, as long as you've put enough away in case the rest fails.
Yeah.
But as an entrepreneur, you couldn't have too much stacked over there because you'd realise you could use that to make that.
Absolutely, 100%.
So
I couldn't agree more.
I guess the question, be two questions. You know, how do your parents feel about, you know, your journey, or do they get it? Or the second question is, knowing that money doesn't create the happiness in isolation. Money's phenomenal and open the doors to so much fucking shit that you've ever dreamed about.
Yeah.
And thankfully, my dreams like that I know I've got the capabilities to go and explore some of those dreams that I've always wanted. But if that's the case, and this is probably a question to me, why would you not just give yourself a break, do a lot less, bank some of the money, put it into some investments, and take that well-deserved rest or reflection?
I mean, well, I guess in terms of answering that particular question, I think the answer is that when our kind of personalities, I think we'd be bored, quite honestly. And as much as every now and then the odd couple of days off is beyond appreciated, you know, I'm the kind of person, I couldn't think of anything worse than just going to a beach and relaxing. I couldn't think of anything worse. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my idea.
I bring my laptop.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It'd be my idea of hell, because I'm always thinking about this, and I'm always trying, again, coming back to the point of always trying to learn. It's like even on TikTok, the TikTok algorithm is always teaching me different new things about AI and all these different things, because I'm always wanting to learn. But like coming back to the parents' point, I'm unbelievably, I've got the most amazing family around me. I'm so thankful. And whilst my mum is the opposite in that she asks me 1,000,001 questions all the time.
Sounds like my dad.
My dad is very much kind of like, okay, you know, how are you getting on here? How are you getting on there? And everything else in between. So it's kind of like the opposite dynamic, Sean, that what I've got. But nevertheless, I'm very, very blessed, and they've been absolutely amazing with me. And quite frankly, I don't think I could have done the stuff that I've done without their support. Yeah,
that's the bit that I will come down to, and whatever shit has happened in my life, because it happens in everyone's life. There's different extremes, of course, and there's always going to be somebody worse off. I do know that I have that roof over my head, and if I was to do something really terrible, my parents would not judge, and they would just support. And my mum and my dad would make me a cup of tea, and
nothing beats a cup of tea, Sean.
No.
Literally, cups of tea put the world to right.
But I actually have that, and to be fair, in my work environment and my colleagues, and you know, all associates and people that I have around me. That's the culture that we have now. That there's no judging. There's more about a willingness for everyone to succeed, and whatever that looks like. Because you know, different people have different drivers, and I definitely don't recommend that anyone is obsessed about getting up at 4 a.m. and going to bed at midnight because they've got endless amount of emails and shit to look at. I'm not saying, I definitely, you know, you've only got one life. Don't spend it just behind a computer. So I'm not saying that's been my path, a lot of it, but the culture keeps me going. It is. I've got no family yet, but every day I go to the office, I know that I'm welcomed, or there's somebody in there trying to help themselves or help me or create something of value. You mentioned Tranmere before. What's your connection with Tranmere?
Well, I was a massive Tranmere fan as a kid. My old man took me. I think my first game was against Southend United. We lost 2-1, but I was hooked. We used to sit in the family stand, and then I had a season ticket for many, many years. And then when I was coming back to the Merseyside area, I'd always try and get to a game with my dad or my sister. And then there was a consultant for Mark, and I think it was in the independent newspaper, and they were asking about how that I work so hard, but what do I do for fun? I said, I'm not sure if it's fun, but I support Tranmere Rovers Football Club. And then next minute, I was very kindly invited to meet Mark and Nicola, and met them at the boardroom for a Liverpool pre-season game. One thing led to another. I could see the kind of things that Mark and Nicola were trying to achieve at the football club. I thought that I could help them in a number of different ways. And then they very kindly asked me to become an associate director of the football club, and I've been in that position now since, I think 2016, 2017.
Tranmere Football Club's a huge business, isn't it? It's football, but it's business.
Absolutely,
and it's what you know.
Absolutely, and it was funny because literally a lot of the same tactics that I'd done in creating all the other brands, I literally put into Tranmere.
And that's what I mean. You've got the fans. The better Tranmere, what you implement as a business will help them do well on the pitch.
Absolutely, and it is. And you talk about culture. That culture is so important within organisations and business. And for me, I appreciate sometimes you have to have very blunt and honest conversations with people, but it's also about trying to find what the positives are to be able to move forward. So all these things, and for me, it's pinch yourself type territory, just to be a part of all this stuff that's going on. And
when I came to Liverpool, I realised for me to have an impact on the city, I'm going to have to get to know the people that run the city, the mover, the shakers. And I had my little Nokia, and I remember the first person's name that I typed in was a guy called Charlie, and he worked on the tea factory on Fleet Street, but I hadn't got his phone number, so he was the main doorman. And I heard someone else say his name, or I said, I think I said, who's that guy? He says Charlie. So I typed in Charlie, but no phone number. Charlie Tea Factory. So then I went inside and got the manager's name. I ordered a drink. I said, what's that? What's your name? So I ended up having a list. So the next time I'd go back, I'd say, hi Charlie. I'd skip the queue. I started training myself to remember everyone's name. And after a while it becomes, you actually get used to remembering names. Because I thought I was terrible at names, but I had such an interest to try and remember his name. So as I was going to the tea factory, I'd type in tea. Oh, fuck, it's Charlie. I'm going to other bar. At that time, it was bar and restaurants. I started knowing everyone's name. And instantly, later on in years, people were saying, who the fuck's that Irish guy? He knows everybody. And all it was just every time there's somebody's name, I would just have it in a little Nokia.
But it's those personal relationships, Sean, that matter. And then that's why...
I faked it. It was a fake it till you make it. I faked it till I make it. Although I do like conversation with people anyway, so it's not that I just remembered the name. There's always a bit of a backup. How much influence has wrestling had on wider sports?
In truth, wrestling has had such an influence. I mean, you look at, for example, the way boxing is presented. Every time a boxer now comes out, it's all the razzmatazz that comes with it. The pyro, the fireworks, the big massive LED screens with all of the different promo videos and everything else that comes around it. And actually, it now becomes not necessarily about who are the best boxers, but who are the biggest and most brash personalities that people are buying into.
Characters.
And if you look, recently, you've got Paul against Mike Tyson that's now going to be on Netflix.
Wow. And
I mean, it is kind of worrying for the sport of boxing, if I'm being perfectly frank with you, because all of a sudden, the fights that people want to see are actually with influencers.
Yeah.
You look at what Logan Paul and KSI are now doing by actually, Logan Paul specifically, by being a wrestler within WWE. You then take The Rock, and actually what are filmmakers now looking for? They're now looking for distribution. Mm-hmm. And if you think of, for example, The Rock's Instagram channels and everything else, and the fact that he's got his own tequila brand, which obviously then kind of goes into the aviation gin for Wrexham, and you look at all these different influencers that are now the movers and shakers of what people are consuming, and especially in a social media generation, as we go into even more instantaneous gratification of content such as TikTok, wrestling has had such a massive influence, and now to the point that wrestling, in terms of WWE, is now merged with UFC. And UFC are actually utilising some of the WWE theme tunes, such as like Kurt Angle's one coming out with, with some of their guys. There's so many connotations and the influence that it's had. And if you think in terms of how wrestling sells a pay-per-view or sells tickets, It's the narrative that's being built up. HBO do all these fantastic documentaries to make people really get behind certain people. So, for example, years ago, when it was like Ricky Hatton versus Floyd Mayweather, and their camera crews were coming over and seeing him train in Manchester and everything else in between, all of a sudden you were then really starting to understand the nitty-gritty of those characters. Well, now, all of that's now starting to happen, whether it's, for example, understanding more about the people behind Wrexham Football Club, whether it's Sunderland Till I Die, and everything else in between, is all of a sudden you've got an immediate buy-in. But all of that, the bits of buy-in in terms of personality and characters, in my opinion, there's so much of that has started from wrestling and the influencer connection. Even go back to WrestleMania, it's going to be WrestleMania 40 this year. But if you think that first WrestleMania had Muhammad Ali on it, it had Cyndi Lauper on it, they were massive influencers of their time. And actually that was 40 years ago. And now it's more prevalent than it's ever been.
So did it change in between?
No,
there's always been
there's always been both sides. Absolutely, there's always been that kind of influence. But as social media has grown to the point that there are so many extra touch points, it's all of a sudden become so much more important than it ever has been, to the point that you're then trying to put those little intricacies to get those people to consume your product. And actually now, for example, if there's a wrestler called Matt Cardona who's done a phenomenal job on his social media, and actually he's got a huge distribution channel. So if all of a sudden, if you're then booking a talent to come onto your show, you're not just getting them as a wrestler in the ring, you're getting all the influence and their distribution channels when they're advertising the shows. So, and then if you look at it like different things, like there's like Celtic, for example. Celtic had a big Japanese connection because of certain players that were there. They're now getting loads of traffic from Japan. They've now got a Japanese section on their website. So all of a sudden, just taking on face value, they're the best player, they're the best fighter, and everything else in between it. Does that mean it's going to put bums in seats? Does that mean it's going to sell shirts? And I appreciate that's a very strange way of looking at it in sport. But of course, within the wrestling world, we are building those storylines to be able to hopefully get buy-in and actually utilise big personalities to grow other personalities, to then all of a sudden, those are going to be the next generation of people that you're going to want to buy tickets for and whatnot. But the influence that wrestling's had on sport and the wider community and the entertainment space, Vince McMahon himself didn't call it wrestling, he called it sports entertainment, and he did it for a reason. And now all those connotations are now in so many different things here today.
Is there the stats in the wrestling world about how after the life after wrestling? Because it's kind of obvious when you look at it, but they got battered. Like people in the wrestling world get battered with injuries, and there's a life. They can't do that forever. Yeah. Do you have stats, or are you aware of the life after wrestling? What they do?
I mean, we don't have stats per se. I mean, it may well be that depending on each organisation, from say a WWE perspective, they might be able to turn around and say that there's an issue to a certain extent. I mean, the WWE do have a rehab program, for example, to help this. One of the things that we have at Progress is we actually have a mental health counselling service, and that's also to be there for the talent if they're. And I don't hear about what they say or anything else in between, but we're doing that to be able to help people as much as possible, because the reality is that these wrestlers, they are putting themselves through the pain barrier all the time, all the time. Because as it's not ballet, which is quite a famous phrase in the wrestling world. It just isn't, and you've got to try and offer those levels of support. And sometimes it's not easy to do that, because actions speak louder than words ever can, right, Sean? But sometimes it's really difficult to put your actions into play, especially when you're not in and around that wrestler all the time, or if you don't realise that they need help in one way or the other. Sadly, there is a number of cases where, not so much now, but I would say probably maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, where wrestlers would get addicted to pain medication, take to drink and drugs and everything else in between. But now I would argue it's not as prevalent as it once was, and I would say that's probably because and again, this is just my opinion, so I might, a lot of people might disagree with me on this, but I don't think the same party aspects of what the wrestling world was about back then is the same as what it is now. I think a lot of people take care of themselves a lot more than what they did back then. But of course, there's all these different wellness policies that actually are within these organisations to ensure that people are being looked after, and support systems in between it all to make sure that hopefully none of those kind of bad things happen.
There's a really good book called The Molecule of More, and when you finish reading that book you understand about the highs and lows of life, and we're all, chemicals drive us all, but you can imagine in that atmosphere you're on a high, you're big, you're strong, you're tough, you're playing out a character, you're psyched up to the max, and then the next day you're out doing your shopping, or you're back in your wherever you live, and it's not you anymore, and then you have to get back into the zone again. And from a chemical background, I actually love following Andrew Huberman. He describes it quite well, but you're up and you're down and you're up and you're down. There's and that's probably in most sports people's lives, but especially in wrestling, where you
well, it's the adrenaline. I mean, I'm not a performer in any shape or form, but after a show, the adrenaline just has gone from me. I mean, I'm a mess the next day, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you're exhausted and you just been screaming.
And all I've been doing is basically been standing there and saying a few bits and bobs. So, the level of respect I've got for the talent is just unbelievable. And the thing is that a lot of talent will come to us and they'll actually be flying overnight, have very little sleep, very little time to prepare, and all of a sudden, before you know it, they're in the ring and they're having their match. And it's as I said, beforehand, the highs are high, the lows are low, but it's very difficult to just be calm all the way throughout, because when the adrenaline's pumping and everything else like that, and you're getting a reaction from the crowd,
you don't want to be calm. That's what you're there for.
Absolutely,
it's
you
excitement,
want those highs,
it's entertainment.
Right? You want them highs for sure.
I remember we touched on it before about my wrestling days was Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks, and then quite quickly it was WWF, and I remember Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and the Undertaker. But you were a big fan then, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was always a Bret the Hitman Hart guy, to be honest with you.
The pretty boy.
Well, I mean, everything I'm not sure, to be honest with you. But literally seeing him, he was fantastic. And actually, a few years ago at the For Love of Wrestling convention, I was very, very fortunate to be the person that interviewed him live for Fight TV in front of about 2,000-3,000 people or whatnot over the weekend, and talking to him in the ring about his career and everything else in between. And Bret had gone through a lot of tragedy, sadly, in his life, with his brother dying in the ring, amongst other things. So it was a real emotional interview. And people always say, "I'll never meet your heroes," but I can honestly say meeting him was one of the best experiences of my life. But then you look at the kind of influence even now that you refer to, like, for example, the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, I was in the airport. I mean, I remember seeing him at the airport the day he passed away, and it was, gosh, goosebumps now. A horrible feeling, awful. But what I will say is that a lot of these wrestlers, they're leaving such an impression on people's lives. And with Warrior, there's even now the Warrior Award that's presented at the Hall of Fame for WWE every year, for basically people that have showcased that warrior spirit and everything else in between it. So the legacy that some of these guys and girls have in the present and in the future, and God bless them when they're no longer with us, it's massive, really. But
I must admit, whenever your name was mentioned and then wrestling was mentioned, I spent a few days just smiling, reflecting on my childhood, looking up, researching wrestling, obviously researching you, and I thought,
reliving your youth.
And you know what? I'm not a jealous person. Like, I love whenever people do well in various businesses, but this one I thought, oh God, how did I miss that business opportunity? I was thinking, is that the one? But then again, I know it's much easier to stand in the audience and cheer than it is actually being the business owner as well. So it definitely isn't all glamorous all the time. So I definitely don't need to go there thinking that. So, as everybody wants to know, with anyone that's successful, driven, and got so many lessons for life, what does the future hold? Or is that like a silly question that you're unsure of?
No, it's not a silly question. It's something I think of all the time, Sean, to be honest with you. What I will say is that having exited a business and albeit under difficult circumstances in the pandemic, is whatever the future is, I've taught myself to actually enjoy the journey, because what I will say is, looking back on all the other things that I created, I don't think I really enjoyed the journey. And whilst sometimes passion can get the better of you, and sometimes you say things you shouldn't say and everything else in between, it's only really coming from a good place because you actually want to succeed. The real question is, what does success even look like? At the moment I'm working on some really, really exciting projects, one of which is Camp New York, which we're sending people to work at summer camps, the New York tri-state region, where they can earn $2,000 working in New York for the summer. For me, for a young person, I think about
go-karts.
Yeah, you can do go-karts. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've been on the website. I like that. There you go. Yeah, literally help teach karting in New York. Yeah. I mean, some unbelievable opportunities, but we make such a difference to the people that actually are the campers themselves and the applicants that go in there. It's a true life-changing experience. So that's something I'm always passionate about. We've then got the Wrestle Tours business, where it's going to be crazy in a couple of weeks when we're all at WrestleMania 40. And then we've got a Defy show, a Progress show on WrestleMania week, which is going to be even more mental. But I'm very, very fortunate to have some, incredible people around me that, quite frankly, are probably better than me in a lot of things. But what I try and do is bring everybody together for the better good, where we continue to achieve things. So, what I'm hoping for is, Camp New York will continue to grow, because it's very much a startup. It only started really on the 1st of September. We've made a huge move with Progress and Defy by merging the two organisations, and it means
Defy's the wrestling.
Yeah, so Defy is based out of Seattle. It's, again, of course, I'm majorly biased, but for me, it's.
So this was another. You've partnered with another company.
Yeah, so so another wrestling promotion, but it's all under one limited company now. So the plan is to continue to grow that into more different territories across the US, and also to grow Progress in the US as well into a number of different shows. So I'm sincerely hoping those businesses will continue to grow. I'm hoping that, and I love what I'm doing at Tranmere. Absolutely love it. It's just pinch yourself territory. But for me, I just want to continue to grow in the right ways. Hopefully, do everything in the right ways as well, because it's all well and good growing, but actually it's got to be within the right infrastructure and everything else in between it. And hopefully we can just continue to do that. My job is to create products that will entertain people, or a service base in terms of the Camp New York stuff. That. Well, I'm trying, but like I said, I'm very blessed. Martin Best, my business partner, Matt Bushak at INA, and Jeff Daly and the rest of the guys, and I've got some great people around me as well that obviously Kat's here today as well, who's a massive help, and Cal and Mike, and I could mention a whole host of other people, but it's all well and good me potentially being the face of certain things. The reality is that they're the guys that deserve the plaudits so much more than I do, and that's why I'll always try and push them more than myself, hence why for me I am quote unquote the reluctant entrepreneur.
It's great for anyone listening to hear about all the successes. Would you like to share some dark day or some difficult moment where it all went completely wrong and you thought, what?
Oh yeah, I've had a few. Yeah, the first big mistake that I made was.
You can't say it with a smile on your face.
Well, the thing,
because I tell mine with a smile on my face.
This is the thing, right? So you think that you've got an idea and it's going to work, right? So back in the day, do you remember a TV show called Geordie Shore with MTV?
Yeah.
And they had this series where they were doing all these different things, where it was Geordie Tours. And basically Geordie Tours, for the most part, was basically a white label of my Invasion company. And then we had all the Invasion branding for all of these different events, everything from those doing beer bikes in Amsterdam, which was I think we ended up selling them to, where did we sell them to? To Zimbabwe randomly, that's it. But we decided we were going to set up a snow division, and our first event was going to be all around the Geordie Shore lot, and they were all wearing the Snowvasion stuff. We'd put, I don't know, somewhere between, and this was a lot of money to be back in the day, because you've got to bear in mind, I was never born with a silver spoon in my mouth, Sean. I literally took £4,000 of my student loan that was supposed to be for law school to what became, a multi-million pound, business in terms of the stuff that I had. But we set up the event. We thought, okay, this is going to be fantastic. We've launched with Geordie Shore, and I kid you not, Sean, we probably put, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 50 and 75 grand in, and we got 3 customers 3, and that was it. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is an absolute disaster. And the reality is that we didn't really know much about about this snow and everything, all that kind of. We just thought, we've got the Abta company, we've got the Atoll side, we can put all of this into one. We've got
was it just no one was interested, or you did it wrong?
I think it was a combination of a few really. I think it was because we didn't understand the market well enough. We realised that the Geordie Shore lot weren't actually big enough influences in that sector to actually make a material difference. And we just didn't really know what we were doing, and we just completely. I mean, that was an absolute disaster. We had.
Did you just blame each other?
Well, yeah. I mean,
that's a very good difficult thing, and that you've got good business partners when you swallow the loss and nobody starts pointing the finger and saying,
absolutely,
who did what.
Yeah, I mean, that was a difficult one for sure. And then we had the wrong business partner in Thailand for my Camp Thailand business, and he ended up stealing. We're talking like 6 figures off us, and we didn't realise what was happening. And then he was sending invoices in that were just being paid, and all of a sudden I found out that we had this massive cash flow problem in the business. And through no fault of anybody's, really, we were then in this horrible scenario where we're having to fulfil all the trips for Camp Thailand. We just spent the best part of £1 million on an office. So all these different things. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, how am I going to get out of this? And
these are all the bits that you don't hear about normally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I literally think, if memory serves me right, I think I had about 10 days to save the business through no fault of our own, and to raise a load of capital and to get people believing in us. And I'm not advocating this, but this is just what happened. I mean, literally I was in shock, really. I just didn't even know what to say. And I wasn't getting anywhere with what was happening in Thailand.
But did you take ownership? Did you realise you fucked up? Or did you not? Were you just left exposed because you had to trust other people?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the buck will always stop with the business owner, right? Whether you like it or not. Yeah. And therefore the responsibility is always there. But when you've got so many other people for that to happen down the chain, I was pretty much gobsmacked, because my CFO actually told me that we had a tax problem. Never mind, actually a tax problem. I need to spend some money. So, for example,
I don't know why I'm laughing.
No, but this is it, right? This is the crazy life that people don't see.
I know you understand, right? But I've got so many things going on in my head now. Going on.
So literally, imagine you need to spend some money. You've got a tax problem. So I go out, Sean, and I go and spend. I think it was £6,500 on a stormtrooper. Literally, the proper stormtrooper for the office. And then literally about a week later, I'm then told all this stuff. And I'm trying to get, and I'll be totally open and honest about it. I am terrible when it comes to figures and stuff like that. I've always been very blessed to have, for the most part, apart from this time.
You need me as a business partner then, because I'm shit at all the other stuff.
Brilliant. Well, we'll chat after this, mate. We'll get you into the wrestling business for sure. But it was a crazy time. Literally, I've got all of that going on. A few weeks before that, I've got all this Britain's Best Boss stuff, and I'm top of the world. I think this is amazing. So then find out all of this stuff has then happened.
He's so good, he just gives money away.
Well, I know, I was just like, what, exactly that. Yeah, Thailand's Best Boss. And what I will say is that even though it was without doubt one of the worst moments I've ever been through, I think you, in times of trouble and strife, you really understand who you are as a person. And I literally just got on the phone straight away and I was like, right, I'm going to make some calls, I'm going to do some deals, I'm going to try and get contracts that will then be paid in advance and everything else. And I remember the first call I made, it was to a visa sponsor. And I said, right, you've always wanted Americamp. I'll do you a deal, but I need X amount and you're going to pay up front, and I need it in 4 days. And they laughed at me. But they paid in 4 days. But
did they negotiate?
Well, I literally said to them, Sean, I said, there's no negotiation, this is it. If you want it, this is where it's at. And then I did the same for Camp Thailand with another partner over there. But I said, you get so not only are you going to have to fulfill these trips for me, but actually you're going to have to leverage some money for me, and then we'll pay it off over time. Unfortunately, because of my reputation and the fact that for me, trust is everything. And if I didn't pull all that stuff off, my name would have been total mud in all these different sectors. Unfortunately, we managed to pull it off. But not that I'm trying to say this is the answer. And I don't drink whiskey at all. But what gave me the courage was, and again, I'm just telling the God's honest true story. It was literally like 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting on the phone, and I drank about half a bottle of Grant's whiskey. I didn't drink whiskey. And I hate whiskey, to be perfectly frank with you, for the most part.
Numb the pain.
But it gave me the kind of confidence to be able to actually say some of the things that I was doing on a negotiation basis. And I even did that when I was trying to do
So what you're explaining to me is somebody that hadn't got a bad business, someone that just had cash flow issues.
Yeah.
Because it's not that you had... And that's something that's so important to know in business. You haven't failed if you've got cash flow. You failed whenever you stop putting cash or raising cash, or the cash isn't able to move.
Yeah.
And it's so apparent to me, because a lot of the companies I'm involved in are startups, and not all of them will succeed. And they all will go into a minus on day one. Because that's how business works. Of course, you have to speculate, and it normally comes from my pocket. So I understand that no matter, especially in this case, okay, the £1 million cash flow was a bit of a shock to the system, but you still actually had a really good business.
We did,
you obviously created a formula that worked, apart from.
Well, if you include it, I mean, albeit some of it were kind of more so disbursements, and I suppose it depends which way you look at it. But and I'm not trying to say, look at me as the big I am, but you know, as a collective, we took what was basically £4,000 of my student loan to make it into a £34 million business, basically. But of course, then you put the pandemic into it all and everything else in between. I mean, what a great time to own a travel, media, and events business. Here you go. Here's a pandemic. You know, I mean, everything else that came from that.
Your American company, is it? So you set it up in September.
Yeah.
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 You've still kept the knowledge of what happened this past 30 years. You can just throw the rule book out the window and hope that there isn't a part two, well, exactly like that. But you obviously had a business that was successful. If you looked at this past 50 years or the past 100 years of how the world works. So it's kind of like so many other businesses out there being slightly unfortunate. But one thing that's really struck a chord there is that you've kept your reputation intact. If you needed to raise some money tomorrow morning, you could pick up the phone, because people will trust you.
I mean, and I'm again unbelievably fortunate to have two the most amazing business partners in Matt Bushek and Martin Best. And whilst it's still very early on in our journey, because we know that businesses don't make money immediately, Sean. We know this. It's normally, at least a 3 to 5 year plan, I would argue, in terms of, at least in the sectors that I'm in. Albeit, I will say this, is that it's a lot harder to replicate what I did then, now, because when I, for example, first started AmeriCamp off, nobody was really utilising social media properly. So we cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Whereas, of course, you're always looking for the latest and the new things that are happening.
That's so interesting, because I'm not an expert I'm not a digital expert at all. I'm quite a novice at it. But I have always sort of thought it must be difficult. Although the digital world has so much opportunity, it's so diluted, because content is being thrown out left, right and centre daily.
Absolutely. And also the way that people consume content, to the point that people don't really have landline phones anymore. They're used to texting, it's WhatsApp, everything else in between it all. So actually trying to sell something is so much harder now as a process compared to what it once was, because your typical sales manager will pick up the phone. The reality is the vast majority of people aren't going to pick it up, because it's like, oh, it's a number I don't recognise.
I'm still operating on text message and phone call, and I've got a WhatsApp that I have on a separate phone in the office, and face to face. The thing about that is it's probably like trying to be a bodybuilder. It takes 10 years, or trying to become some sort of athlete. It must take a long time, because I literally would still to this day prefer to spend an hour or two of this quality time than like someone's picture or try and do it the fast way. Maybe it's just what I'm used to, but I do have a feeling there's a market for that now. If somebody's willing to put in the graft and the hours and get to know someone and look them in the eye and get them to believe you and understand that they can trust you. I still think somehow the long game, that's the best game. Okay, you can make contact now quite quickly. You can you can follow someone, you can engage with them, but as soon as you're able to and willing to put the hours in, and
well, I agree with you, and I presume it's the same for yourself. I mean, like LinkedIn absolutely drives me mental. Absolutely drives me mental.
It drives the other team mental. It doesn't drive me mental.
Well, good for you, man. Good for you. Because literally, it's like I don't want to accept anybody in LinkedIn because I just know I'm going to get, they're using some naughty pieces of software, which will then get my email address or then send me an email. Whereas actually, I'd much rather go out and meet people, build relationships face to face. When actually, it's called social media, Sean, but the reality is it's anti-social media.
Well, that's why and I said before, I have an amazing team of people that protect me. And what's great is I've got people that love the digital world. So I just found someone who loves the digital world and can, operate that and support me on that part. Then I've got people that love admin, people that love X, Y, and Z, and I just, find these people that love doing the certain things that I need. Yeah. To make me be the best version of myself. It's a absolute pleasure to have you here. I've heard so many great things about you through some of the people we jointly know, and now delighted to have you as somebody that I can call my friend and get to know in the coming months and years. So thank you for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and let's hope Tranmere win at the weekend.
Absolutely. No, seriously, Sean, it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's really good to meet you, mate. Spot on.
Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider watching some of our other fascinating chats here. If you'd like to stay up to date with all the latest podcasts, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell below.